his intense shadow boxing drills lasting for hours, to his scary ability to endure the nastiest workouts. This is how Dricus Du Plessis prepares for his fights. Let's kick things off with the reason behind his exceptional striking. Not only does he pack enough power to defeat any fighter in the world, but he's super creative as well. For someone who's amazing in the kickboxing and grappling departments, it's surprising to see how good he is with his hands. When a fight is announced, Du Plessis instantly goes into beast mode and spends long hours at the gym, shadowboxing to make sure he can throw fire from those really tight and awkward angles. It's a war against himself when he's inside that ring, and it's not the normal shadowboxing. No sir, this guy could have easily made a career in the boxing ring if he wanted to. But why is he so keen on shadowboxing, when his strength clearly lies in launching those deadly leg kicks? Well, this part of his training is usually used to add versatility to his game. Since his opponents know that he'll most likely try to maintain the distance and take the fight to the ground, they end up building their entire game plan around that. But when it's showtime and the South African is standing across them in the octagon, he sends them packing with a huge knockout blow, doing some serious damage and changing the momentum of the fight. It's just one of those things that his opponents never see coming, because they're always expecting a takedown. But as soon as they get close, he throws a lightning-fast jab, followed by a brutal hook to stun his opponent. And at the same time, it also helps him counter aggressive fighters. Like I just said, since Dricus is best at grappling and kickboxing, he prefers to keep some distance between himself and his opponents. But that becomes extremely difficult when you're taking on an aggressive fighter, because those guys love closing the distance, getting all up close and personal to turn the fight into an absolute slugfest. So how does the South African manage to keep his cool in those situations? The credit goes to his specialized counterattack training. His sparring partner will constantly launch attacks at him. Instead of responding to everything, Still Knox spends the majority of time working on his defense and finding the perfect opening to throw a deadly counter. It goes super well with his shadow boxing training, mainly because it's allowing him to find these angles, which is usually tricky when his opponent is on the offense. Oh, and his counter training doesn't include leg kicks at all. It's just jabs, hooks, and cuts, nothing else. And like I said before, he's usually just getting hit over and over again while trying to find the perfect opening. So, next time you see him land a dangerous punch out of nowhere, know that it's something he spent hours trying to perfect. Plus, considering how he's set to take on the dominant Robert Whittaker for his next fight inside the octagon, I think this training is going to be crucial to his success against the Australian. The Reaper isn't exactly a fighter who likes to hold back, and since Du Plessis is the underdog going into this matchup, it would be amazing to see him cause an upset using his insane counters. And since I mentioned that his counter training doesn't include leg kicks, you must be wondering, what makes him so good at kicking down his competition? Well, you know Bruce Lee said that he doesn't fear a man who's practiced 1,000 different kicks, and instead fears the man who's practiced one kick 1,000 times? That's exactly the case with Dricus. The guy goes hard during his training. I mean, I feel sad for the punching bag in his gym because he's always putting on a beating. The South African keeps things simple. Instead of making things busy by going over 1,000 different techniques, he just practices the same kick over and over again, making it a super important part of his moves. I'm sure you've seen him land that signature low kick of his that always forces his opponents to step back and rethink their strategies. Well, the only reason that happens is because he spent hours perfecting it. Even during the build-up to his fights, Dricus refuses to get all flashy by adding variety to his training routine. He just focuses on the basics. So when he steps inside the cage, he's covered in every aspect and has enough tricks up his sleeve to dominate his opponent. And then, just like regular sparring, he also puts himself through intense sessions with just kicks. Him and his sparring partner spend hours just throwing kicks at each other. And again, I think this will help him a lot as he gears up to take on Whittaker. So yeah, it's pretty obvious until now that he doesn't really focus on volume, and it's more about the quality of training to make sure he's prepared for his fights. But what about defense? How does he prepare for that one? There's no easy way to put this one. Just like UFC heavyweight champion John Jones likes to smack himself all over the body to get ready, Dricus spends weeks getting hit without guarding himself to make sure he's in that mindset. There's even a video of him standing up straight. not guarding or anything, while his sparring partner keeps kicking him in the stomach. Now that right there is what I call the heart of a champion. He's willing to go so far just to make sure his body doesn't give in during his fights. But this helps him in other ways too. The only reason Dricus does this to his body is to prepare his mind. Yeah, he puts his body through hell, so it won't disobey him in those high-voltage thrillers, and also gets all fancy using tennis balls, which are apparently becoming a thing at the promotion now. How it works is that his partner stands behind him and whips the ball at the wall while he shadow boxes, which keeps his reaction times in check since he doesn't know when the ball is being launched. Dricus has always been prepared for his fights, regardless of the opponent, and whether it's offense or defense, he's always on his A game. Plus, all those kettlebells really seem to keep him agile. The South African loves getting in good workouts leading up to his fights, and I'll get to those heavy lifting routines in a bit. But before that, I want to go over how Dricus likes to get loose before his fights, to make sure his movements are more flowy and on point. It's interesting because he likes to include weights in his agility training, which usually involves a lot of kettlebells and resistance bands. He doesn't overdo this part though, because there's a huge risk of injury, especially when you're swinging around really heavy kettlebells. Thing is, kettlebell exercises need a good amount of room to be done safely, and if there's not enough space or things in the way, you could end up bumping into stuff or having accidents. But aside from that, resistance bands also come in handy for replicating positions, like when an opponent is putting a lot of pressure on a particular part of his body. So, in a way, he's not only improving his agility, but he's also building strength in positions that would be difficult to do otherwise. Overall, it's a different and unique way to prepare for his fights, mainly because there haven't been a lot of UFC fighters who put themselves through this kind of training. Either way, it seems to be working for him since he's been dominating his fights. But he has a weakness, and I think it boils down to how he trains right before his matchups. Like I was just saying, Du Plessis loves going hard at the gym, and while most of it is kettlebells and resistance bands, he does a lot of heavy lifting as well. Sometimes he has 3 plates stacked on his back as he holds a plank, and then we have the basic movements like deadlifts, bench presses, and shoulder presses. But you must be wondering why I think that's not the best idea. Thing is, if you've seen some of his fights, you've probably noticed how he's always gassed in the later rounds. And in my opinion, it's because he doesn't do enough cardio and lifts more than he has to. Of course, he's been winning his fights, but this is one particular weakness that could end up costing him big time against Whittaker. The Aussie loves taking the fight into the deeper rounds when his opponents are out of fuel, and that's when he really starts picking them apart. So, Du Plessis needs to train to conserve his energy if he wants to stand a better chance against Robert, considering he's already an underdog in the matchup. But either way, he's an absolute monster when it comes to training before fights. So there you have it. From his scary ability to endure through insane workouts to those deadly shadow boxing drills, that was how Dricus gets ready for his fights.